Robschild here. Welcome everybody to Chapter 10 of Security Analysis. Nothing I say is investment advice, and I am here to have a discussion about the chapter, not replace the contents of the chapter. Let's jump right in. So, the title, Specific Standards for Bond Investment, continued. The relation of the value of the property to the funded debt. So this chapter, essentially, assuming that you read it, obviously, is all about mostly about mortgages, mostly about the property value of a company or a household and its ability to pay its debt. You know, whether you're taking a loan out on the property or most cases you take the loan out to buy it. And I'll talk about some things I'm actually a little confused about in this regarding down payments and these numbers. Modern down payments don't seem to match the numbers in here. So we'll get into that a little bit. So it before I really read this book, I have been using price book value as one of the major metrics that I use to judge the value of a company. And reading this chapter has gotten me to understand how important it is to understand that just because something has been valued at a certain price, as far as, the book value, the value of their buildings, the value of their property, the value of the stuff they have, just because they have a number for that, it doesn't mean that they can necessarily sell everything they have for that price right now or in the future. And especially, more so, it can be problematic in the future. And that's really what this chapter is really all about. So going through some of the main points, he talks about the minimum book value required by New York statute not being super helpful for various reasons. And then, we go into a lot about equipment obligations. So basically owning debt on owning equipment like tractors or equipment inside a factory, just equipment. And it seems like he's a big fan of equipment trusts because it's very secure. Generally speaking, equipment has a certain to produce things. It does lose value over time when it's brand new and it's shiny, but that's calculated into the accounting. But he likes it because it's like, you can sell the equipment and you're good. Where and then what this chapter goes into is the problems that you encounter with other kinds of debt involving mostly real estate. So moving on directly through the chapter, we have a discussion of debenture versus collateral bond, and he talks about how the good and the bad of the debenture thing. If you don't know what that is, look into it. It's worth knowing about. I found a good website that compares. You want to compare what is a debenture compared to something that's a collateralized bond. This chapter is more about bonds that have collateral, obviously. So then when we get into mortgages, I had not thought of this before. I have not thought of it the way that he thinks about mortgages, and I love this. It's the value of the underlying asset, it depends on its ability to earn money. So think about that statement. The value of a building it depends on its actual ability to earn money. And it doesn't matter if we're talking about a house or a condo or an apartment that you rent out, or uh, a office building or something like that. It's all about its ability to make money. Are the people living in the rental able to make money to be able to pay uh, to cover the interest plus profit, which he says needs to be 100% over the interest, by the way. But yeah, he talks about how that compares to the industrial, and there's some little details on there. He uses the term going concern. There's a lot of terms in here that I maybe are antiquated that I am not familiar with. I see these terms and I'm like, what does that mean? And it's apparently that's an accounting term I didn't realize before. In going concern, it's the equivalent of really current liabilities to current assets. I think that's the idea, is the ability to pay off its debt over the next 12 months, apparently. So that's what that means in the chapter, I think. He goes on to talk about being wary, basically, of the appraisals of property value. Now, funny enough, like, I feel like this must have been written after 2007, right? Like, be careful about that whole situation. But it was the same thing in 1929. Apparently, they had a little bit of a blow up in the supposed property values, and it involved an inflated sense of, it was just an inflated, everything was inflated as far as the value of property and assets in 1929. Similarly to 2007, and we just kind of covered it with band-aids, it sounds like, from the people I listened to in 2007, and the real problems supposedly have not really been fixed. So we may see the real problems shine through within the next few decades here, but I digress. So regarding that, the next subtitle I wanted to mention, quote, debt based on excessive construction costs. So if you look at construction costs over the past 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, and you see it going, at a normal pace, and then all of a sudden it spikes up along with the value of properties. And I think that's what he's saying happened before 1929. You got to slam on the brakes and say, well, hold on a second. Just because it's more expensive to build things now doesn't necessarily give these properties the value that they supposedly have. I mean, and I see the same thing going on today, I think. Sorry, I'm bumping this thing. You see housing prices skyrocketing compared to everything else, while nothing else is going up that quickly. And it's like, it's something to be careful of. I mean, and I mean, so this is more in terms of being the lender for straight fixed investment. So we move on to the next part, talking about the weakness of specialized buildings. He really doesn't like hotels and garages. I don't know. He must have got hurt by some hotels and garages. He brings it up later in the chapter. We'll bring it up again. But it kind of just rolls over the same ideas throughout the rest of this chapter, I think. But moving on, one other important aspect to understand, for example, about owning apartments, when it's shiny and brand new, typically the rent's actually going to be higher. As it gets older, the rent will likely actually go down, especially like maybe not in nominal terms, but in real terms. So in other words, with inflation going up, the price of the rental is not going to be going up as fast um, as inflation is, just because it's losing its luster. And so he says you do need to take that into strong consideration as someone lending to someone wanting to buy an apartment. So yeah, along with that, value cannot be determined only by current rent. You do have to factor in the depreciation over time, as you do with any real asset, I guess we could say. Then we have a section on he says, be careful with a lack of financial information on a company for their debt. If you don't lend to the guy in a mask, in an alley that's not telling you what the money's for, essentially, I think, is the idea behind that. And then for being someone that's providing a mortgage, he says don't do it through an intermediary. I found that to be interesting. I think the idea being that there are additional risks and costs, and it's just there's no point to it. So, I don't know how that exactly applies to everything today. I mean, I guess specifically if you have like how would you anyway? I'm not going to bother trying to think through that right now. Let's get through the rest of this chapter. So other rules are that the loan should be no more than 66 2/3% value of the value of the recent actual cost or the real market value. And so he doesn't like these guys going around and appraising properties and for higher costs. I just talked to a guy actually about that, how it was helping his situation somehow, getting an official appraiser to come in and be like, oh, this is how much your house costs. I don't remember the exact situation. But point is, stick to the real market value, the actual market value, not an appraised market value. And then obviously don't be speculative about the supposed price, yourself, about this specific asset. Especially if the price recently really skyrocketed. Take a look at the history. Most websites you go to, even looking at housing, you see, oh, it was sold for this much on this date, sold this much on that date. I mean, from what I've seen, it does seem like real estate has been skyrocketing lately. Makes me wonder about what's going to be happening next in our own economy today. So then the real value should not exceed 50% of the loan. The real value should exceed 50% of the loan, and that's where that 66 number comes in. So you have the and it's the same kind of thing. So the loan should be 66 basically percent, and then half that added to it. So I think you get it. So that brings me to a point that these numbers tend to assume that someone buying something is only borrowing 66% of the value. So that leaves how much? 33.3333% left. Where is that? How does the person supposed to deal with that amount of money? It sounds to me, please discuss in the comments below, but it sounds to me like down payments at that point sound like they were probably expected to be a third of the cost. Now, in more recent history, it's been traditional for it to be 20% down if you're buying a house. And doing a quick internet search, it seems that today it's dropped to be as low as 6% of the full cost being the down payment. So I think Graham and Dodd would look at what's going on today and be a little bit concerned about how stressed markets are. I mean, how stressed debt is. Now, I've heard other people talk about this, and I didn't realize to the extent of, how far it's gone. That sounds like that's what really caused the financial crisis. And again, we are in a situation today where, I don't know, the numbers don't seem all that solid compared to what he's talking about. But let's move on. Let's get through the end of this. So he mentions, of course, the income of the, let's call it the rental, should be a minimum of 100% over interest charges. So if the interest charge is a certain amount, make sure that the income coming in is double that, so it can, comfortably be covered if you're the one lending out, is the idea here for your fixed income asset. And then I wanted to read a quote from page 143 I found interesting, and I quote, "In addition to the above quantitative tests, the investor should be satisfied in his own mind that the location and type of the building are such as to attract tenants and to minimize the possibility of a large loss of value through unfavorable changes in the character of the neighborhood." Now, there's a footnote on this, and he's referring to the fact that I believe he's talking about tenants of office buildings in some financial district that was like a hot place, and then it became a lot less of a hot place. And so if you're going to be, I think, if you're going to be holding debt, so how does this really apply to us today? I think the main thing here is that if you're going to be owning bonds, or you're going to be owning the debt of someone based on real estate, you need to take all these things into strong consideration. Take into the consideration that the neighborhood might spiral downward in the future. Take into consideration the fact that a brand new building is worth often substantially more than an old building, and so over time you have that depreciation. And so I think we just need to consider all of these things, and then like I said earlier, make sure you don't do this kind of transaction for a hotel or a garage as for straight investment. It's more appropriate, he says, for private capital to be involved with that, or to not have it be collateralized loan obligation, but it's something that depends on the value of the building and the land, because the value of the building and the land depends on the success of the business, and that's assuming you read the chapter, that you'll see that's obviously one of the really big main points is that. So along with that, my key takeaway is careful with book value. That's what I would say, and I'm thinking about, because I don't see myself going into much fixed value investment, especially straight fixed value investment, anytime soon. These kinds of investments are typically for older people that you want to have the steady income that you can depend on, because growthy stuff can take 10, 15 years before you actually make the profits that you need, and you might be dead by that time. So that it's as an individual investor, fixed value income obviously is, like I'm sure everyone watching this knows, is for retirement age people, obviously. But the lessons to get out of this, I think, are the ones that we discussed. And yeah, that covers everything. So hope you enjoyed this episode, and see you next time for Chapter 11, Rob's Child.